week, Sukhchandan Kaurji, we're going to talk about synthesis in terms of education. And you know, we've both had the experience of education, both formal and informal education, and I know that in my case, most of my knowledge about Sikhi has taken place through informal means, but nevertheless, we still learn, and we still try to make sense of what we learn from our British education and what we learn from our Sikhi. So there are certain kind of things about these two different approaches that it's not a case of like one is right and one is wrong. It's a case of like, how can we make sense of both these approaches so that we can benefit from the value of both ways of seeing things. And one of these is our connection to nature, for example. And I know that our gurus, they've always advocated this oneness about our interconnectedness with all of life. And whereas the scientific method, it kind of tends to see us as being separate from nature, you know, like the Newtonian kind of logical, rational kind of approach. It's as though nature is separate to us. We are there to conquer and master nature, rather than nature being a part of us. So for you, how have you made sense of this in your life so that we're kind of synthesizing our relationship with nature? When are we separate and when are we interconnected with it?
For me, I think being part of the nature, I have never been able to differentiate myself from that. Having grown up on the farm, very much really nature is part of everything. I didn't pick up my food from the shelves.
Sukhchandan Kaurji, could you put your mobile phone on a steady surface because it's moving? Yeah, if you put it on a steady surface, then that.
Let me just turn around because I have.
Yeah, because otherwise it's yeah. That's better.
Is that any better?
Yeah, as long as because it kept
just
before it was wobbling.
I'll sit here, and I've just put that in one place. Before it was on my laptop, and laptop was on my knees.
Okay, yeah, and you can tell if it's on your knees because then it's not stable. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so go ahead. Yeah, you being brought up in a farm, that kind of helps us to see our relationship with nature, doesn't it?
I think having grown up in nature in India, where nature, you know, with Sikhism, very much part of every way of life rather than part of life. We just see ourselves as an extension of nature, that we are part of this nature. Yes, then there's technology, that there's an advancement in that sense. And as they say, man has gone to the moon and can, with technology, yes, all of that is very much part of it. But I think I see that humans or man exploiting the nature to their advantage and to make their life much more easier, better, or they in everybody's eyes too. In some ways it has. For example, technology. We are talking to each other here, and that is, how do you connect that to nature? But it is convenient, it's really good, it connects people. So it connects people in different ways. For me, technology has always, ever since I've been part of it, has had a very significant meaning, and I have welcomed it in my life. The very reason because I was the only person from my family in the UK, everybody being in India and other countries, USA, and I felt very alone. And so technology was very much had become connected me to other people. So it connected me to people who were connected to nature. Talking about my mom living in the village, very much, she didn't change much in her life. So for me, I do believe really that I think we are all part of nature. That fundamental principle remains there.
Yeah, and when you talk about your family, again, think there's this kind of concept of what is family and what is like the strong relationships as opposed to the weaker relationships. And I know that in the British education, we very much focus on a nuclear family in terms of the strong relationships, and that anything other than the nuclear family is a weaker relationship. Whereas in our Sikhi, we tend to like, mamme, mammiam, dai, chache, bua, they're all not so much now, but when I was a child, my daya was the same as my father. That relationship, the relationship I had with my daya was as strong as the relationship I had with my papa. And so in terms of our relationships and our connectedness, how do we make sense of both the nuclear and the extended family? Because again, let's try and avoid thinking like, well, one is better than the other, so we're not talking about advantages and disadvantages of either a small family or an extended family. We're looking at, well, how do we harmonize these two ways of living, these two lifestyles? Because we can all agree that relationships are important, because we're talking about interconnectedness. Relationships are fundamentally important. How do we ensure that these relationships are strong and valuable?
If you in Punjabi, there are times when people are, they said the dharam di maan, janam di maan. I think that probably that thread will seep through all the relationships. I think that's when we say somebody who is dharam di maan, it could be your auntie, it could be somebody else, and I think that really gives you the strength and the connectedness with those people, because they may not have given birth to you, but they have had highly significant impact on your life. And talking about, uncles, aunties, taya, mummy, now, because of my connectedness with my mom, I had a very close connection with my mamajis and masajis, although I have to say, they lived quite far away, didn't see them very often, but we did have that connection with them. We had that love and care and that respect. With one of my mamajis, he was in Air Force and became quite crippled with arthritis. Now, I didn't know details of him, but I did have a good relationship with him. He had a very good understanding of me as a person, what kind of child I was growing into. And as I was growing up, he always remembered, he used to say, Poop, which is my nickname, say, you should be a writer. And he's long gone, but I say, I ended up writing millions of reports, court reports, yeah. But it's that connectedness with the extended family. Like a few years back, my Masiji was alive and I was in India, just as my other cousin was there from Australia. And they were going to pass through the Patiala, where I was. So we just talked on the day, and I jumped in on the bus with them. So three of us, we went to Masiji place. We took her out, everything from Sanduk, wearing, tried it, wedding lehengas. It just connected us. We had so much fun living through my Masiji's eyes. As we were doing all of this, she was almost kind of, she was sharing her memories, how my mom was connected with her, with a particular piece of, whether it was Lenga or Chunni or whatever, how it is that connectedness, which hard to describe, but it was there. You can only feel it.
That's right. Yeah, you talk about feeling it, and you talk about some of your relatives having passed on, and for me immediately I think about consciousness as opposed to the body, because physically we know that when someone dies physically they're no longer around, but their consciousness remains. And again, like, this is a difference in terms of how we experience life, because my my Thaya and my mother, my father, it's like I very often feel their energy, their consciousness, their spirit, I suppose, around me, even though they are no longer around physically. And so do we so what is this kind of focus on the physical, material kind of existence of somebody, as opposed to their spiritual, intangible existence in our memories, in our hearts, in our feelings, in our consciousness.
That comes easy to me because during my childhood, my she lived far away from her family. So we didn't have really aunties, uncles. And in my paternal side of the family, there were two villages. So my Taiji's village was a very large family. They were settled in one village, we were in another one. So I didn't grow up with that daily contact, that connection, the physical presence. So our relationships, we met occasionally, but that's how we formed those relationships, which later on in my life, I came to the UK, not having that feeling really they were far, far away, but still having that connection through letters. Then came the telephone calls, and then came the WhatsApp calls, and now talking to people through Zoom, through, all of this. And whereas sometimes my sister and myself, we will connect with each other, we'll continue what we are doing. So it's not, a person doesn't need to be there well, our emotional relationships were very strong and they kept alive. And with my mom, she had been gone for 10 years this year. Day doesn't go by when I actually do not, her words, something what she would describe, she would say things, doesn't come to my mind. Now, I don't sit and cry, really, mom's gone. Even when I first had the news that my brother called me that she's gone, he was upset, he was crying. One, I was saying, we need to let her go. She needs to go because she has done her journey. So part of me was very logical, but emotionally, I felt I needed to let her go so she doesn't feel, her soul doesn't feel tortured, that my children are upset or scared. And I think it's the testament to really how she raised us to be independent, to be self-sufficient, and be able to meet our needs, and give her that peace wherever I don't know whether she feels anything or not feel it, but I do feel that I am conscious that I do not want her to feel that for some reason she has failed in raising me, that I cannot cope without her. But I want her to be proud of her parenting, what she did and what she gave and what she inspired and created in us, where we were able to happily continue and have that presence felt, yet not crippled by it.
Yeah, and that's there's this respect for the presence of someone, and that presence doesn't have to be in material form. The presence is you feel and you respect your mother's presence, even though she's not physically around.
Yes, and now with my children, my grandchildren, I do not see them every day. I do not speak to them every day, but I can confidently say I do have a really very strong relationship with my grandchildren, even though you made them see them after a week, 2 weeks, or even a month. And I feel that in the hug that I receive when I see them, or the excitement and then jumping up and down, and their parents kind of watching that, really how happy the children are to see me. And then just getting in there straight away, there's no really kind of trying to get into their routine. Just you jump in straight because that connection is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sorry, I was just going to say, I've always made a point that I was never going to take anything that it becomes but I brought. It has to be but my presence, what they get from me.
Right.
And
yeah, and the other thing is about the grandparent and grandchild relationship is that I know when my nanny was still alive, she told me lots of stories, and I still remember some of the stories that she told me. And that, we pass on knowledge, and we learn so much about life through the stories and through the poetry that our family formerly, we absorb the messages within these stories. And then on the other hand, we have the scientific method, which is not so much about stories, which is more about facts and how, facts categorize our knowledge into different areas. And so how do we make sense of the importance of learning through stories and the importance of learning facts and logic and through analysis?
I think that the stories are connected, or we are connected. It connects people emotionally. It connects people in that consciousness with each other. Whereas, yes, factually, I don't know. I just really feel that there's a lot of emphasis on the emotional world for me. The practical, the material world will carry on. You've got more money, you can buy more stuff. You have this little money, you buy that little stuff. But in terms of where you settle with that, is having that, what's the word? Having that contentment with. So therefore, yes, as I said, I think that with science and for example, one of my brothers is a rationalist. He does not believe in God, and he's a rationalist. He's very much everything on the scientific basis. And yeah, we are very close, but I am a very spiritual, religious person. He's not. And although he's a younger, but he had tried to influence me too. And we have come to a point where, okay, we are together by this, but when you become disrespectful to something that I value, our paths are different. Don't try to make them one, because they're not going to be. My values, my views are mine, and I'm not just going to change them because yours are different, or you think yours are better. So I very much love his approach. He does lots of programs in terms of where, these barbarians, they do this, the Jantar Mantar Tona and all that kind of stuff. And he shows people facts. Look, this is the fact. This is how it actually happens. And through the farmers' protest, he was very vocal in locally. He was saying to people that wake up, because you're having the hard time, it's not because of your kismet. It is because these are the policies that government have made. These are how they're influencing. So using fact and science in that sense, I think it actually is very healthy way of that you do not just have blind faith in things. You use science to make sense of the world, as far as science goes.
Yeah, that's an important concept. So we talk about Gismet, and so there's that that approach to life of like, well, everything is determined, and whatever is my Gismet and Garam from the previous life, I will reap the rewards of those. And then there's the other approach of like, well, no, everything is under our control. We have freedom of will, and we can set goals and live life with a purpose. And so how do we balance these two ways of approaching life? One is very goal driven. It's like everything is under our control. And the other one is like, well, what's going to happen is going to happen anyway. So how do we make sense of both and know when to have that deterministic approach to life, and when do we know what to control? It reminds me of that prayer, the Christian prayer of like, God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. How do we use our wisdom to know which things are part of our kismet and which things are part of our control?
I think when I think about that, a Punjabi idiom comes to my mind, that basically, in order to get a result, you need to do something. You're not going to feel cool if you do not move the fan in front of you. You're not going to get something if you just leave it to Kismet and you do not make any effort. So I just really, I don't know, how do I kind of articulate that, my thoughts? I just really feel that there is, you do your best. You try and get, if you feel you see get help from friends, or talk to people, talk to family, that really, if there's an issue, you look at, you explore that, you look into it and really what it is, and you try and understand it. Sometimes you can resolve that. You think, yes, I can make a difference here. And therefore, yes, my effort, what I do, I have a control to a certain extent. Then there comes a point, for example, in my work, there are certain policies, legislative, that drawn from the legislation, which restrict what I can do. Whilst I can support the organization which I do in making those changes for future, for now, I need to work within them. So I accept that those are my limits, but within that limit, I will exploit it the best I can for the benefit of what is supposed to be. In my case, children that I work with who are abused, and I was chairing a meeting this afternoon. It was very much, oh, he doesn't want to do this, he doesn't want to do this. And I was saying, but he's a child, we are a corporate parent, you need to be not just giving, how much do we work with our children? So do not, they say, oh, he doesn't listen to this. I said, well, most parents feel that their children do not listen in their teenage or adolescence period, but we don't give up. So in that, yes, well, you can't force a child to do anything, but at the same time, you've got to work with them to encourage them and to show the consequences of really the choices that they can make, show them what these are the options, these are the consequences, and so that you educate them as we go along, rather than just sit back and thinking, oh, doesn't want to listen.
I suppose that kind of connects with this purpose of education and the purpose of changing our behavior. If the child knows why they're being asked to behave in a particular way and it has a purpose, then they may be motivated. But, so is the purpose of our education, or both the formal and informal education that we've received, is it simply to gain a better standard of living? Or is our education designed to improve our character and our well-being in some way? So this child who refuses to change their behavior, is that change in behavior requested so that this child will have a better standard of living, or is that behavior being requested because they will feel better?
I think the purpose of education is it is multifaceted. Yes, better education leads you to better, at least that's what we believe, it leads you to get a better job and better standard of living. But that's not all. I think education is there to open up your mind to other perspectives, respecting other people, understanding other people, and having that much better relationship with the world around you and the wider world. Because if you just remain in your own thoughts, then you will always be right. The rest of the world will always be wrong. It's about understanding different perspectives. I think education opens up your eye, as I said, third eye, where you just not see the situation from your point of view, if you see from other people's point of view. I enjoy travel. I do go to different places, and always interested in really how people live, what's the norm there, what is okay, what's not okay there. And again, with my own work, I work with parents, family, children from different different walks of life. What's normal in one family is certainly not norm in the other. There was something I'm trying to remember. There was something which I came across the other day. I was telling children, yes, I was listening to my granddaughter to read a book. And in that we were talking about, there was a book about Tooth Fairy. different perspectives. And in it that is the English. So I kind of invoke a discussion. What used to happen when I was a young child? I was, when we lost our teeth, what was the custom and the norm in our way? And she said, so she asked me, she said, so Nani, you didn't get any money? I said, no, we didn't get any money. She said, oh, that's sad. I said, no, it's not sad. I prayed for a new tooth and I got a new tooth and I've still got them. So money was not really part of really what I was looking forward to. I was looking for that I've lost a tooth, I'll get a new tooth. So that was a discussion I have, with the 7-year-old when I was listening her to read, and it was just a very simple story about Tooth Fairy, what Tooth Fairy does. And it's having that, opening up the children's minds about there are other ways, which are equally good, equally valid.
Yeah, that story again reminds me of like this focus on, some of the British education that I've had. The focus is on we do something and we gain a material reward for it, rather than exploring our connectedness and our position in the world. How do we fit in with the rest of the world? How do we fit in with others? What is our impact on others? What is their impact on us? So when I was at school, I wasn't really, maybe I just didn't go to a very good school, but I certainly wasn't educated in a way that I felt confident at the end of that education. I didn't feel confident about my role in the world. I knew a lot of facts. I gained my qualifications, but they were facts and knowledge, but they didn't really provide me with that kind of high level of self-esteem and confidence to know that, to explore my own kind of power as a result of the education that I'd received, as it were.
Yeah, I think the way I can relate to that, that education doesn't always mean that you gain financial benefit. I qualified as a social worker in the UK. Now, when I was growing up, education was rare, and even I was in a government school, state school, even that amount of fees was too much, but 6 rupees or something a month. Now, and after doing all that, and then joined the army, then I came here, and once I came here, I started working in a factory, because everybody, all my counterparts who came around the same time, that's what people did. And subsequently, I gained social work qualifications. And from there, then I went on to gain legal qualifications. Now, I have never moved into the legal profession, but the benefit that it gave me was the emotional benefit. I think it wasn't really that I will improve standard of living, but it was, for me, I think gave me something. I don't know how, it was more emotional benefit, knowing that you are able to achieve, and that confidence that is crushed through bad marriage and and the racism and all that migration that actually takes so much away from you, and you're left with very little, and left with this label, you're freshy, you're unique little Asian woman, you all those, and you have to kind of find ways to dispel those myths that I'm not weak. So gaining qualifications in that sense gave me the confidence that I'm no less than anybody else. In fact, I'm able to achieve more with what I have. So yes, it's education, yeah, very important, but it depends really how you use it, what need it meets in you.
That's right. When I was teaching teenagers, they wanted to go to university, and I would always be saying to them, well, the purpose of education is to give them more confidence. It's not really about the qualification. It's about the extra confidence that they will have when they have that qualification in their hand. And also the fact that without the qualification, so here we're talking about 16 to 18-year-olds, without that level 3 qualification, this is the way I used to explain it to them, that they would have a few options about what kind of job they could do, whereas with a higher level qualification, they would have more choices. So it's about having more options available and having the freedom to choose whether they want to do this job or that job. Whereas without the qualification, it's like, well, this is a job. Either you,
yeah.
You see. So
totally agree. Yes, that.
So the other thing is about categorization and connections. I think again with the British education, there seemed to be very much of a focus on categorizing and specializing. So for example, I did a degree in psychology, but my degree in psychology didn't teach me about history, didn't teach me about social, well, okay, we did a little bit about sociology, but it was only about psychology, like the category of psychology, which was not about all the other things that I was interested in, like art. How does psychology relate to art? How does it relate to, all these engineering, for example? How does, architecture, how is that related to psychology? How does architecture affect the way our well-being, whether we feel connected with others or disconnected with others? So whereas like with Sikhi, I feel that there's more of a focus on our connectedness. It's not so much about categorization of like, well, this is black and that is white, and we can't really mix the two together. So, and obviously both categorization and connections, they're both important, because I think this is one thing that one of the reasons that the British did so well in colonizing us in India, because they had very sophisticated infrastructures because of their ability to categorize and create systems that were very efficient, whereas the systems that they found in that existed there, it was more kind of lackadaisical, like we know, you and I have both gone back to the Punjab, and we know, like, there's not like an orderly queue. People just kind of like, it's very random, isn't it? There's not like a categorization. Well, this is a straight line, we form a straight queue. And we and so how do we benefit, having the benefit of both approaches? How do we synthesize both this ability to be able to analyze and categorize, and at the same time see the connectedness with the bigger picture?
I think I can totally relate to that. I more specialize in child protection, but more I've gone into it, I just feel I just feel that I'm more like a jack of all trades rather than one particular aspect, because I do have varied interest. I'll see something and I'm very interested in that. I'm not single-minded in that way, that I only want to pursue one kind of, the courses or training or meeting people. Raman, my daughter, calls me, she said, "Mom, you're just chaos, just really everything." I said, well, then that's me, because I can't define myself and really put myself in a pigeonhole. I am a bit of everything. I do have interest in different things, or I'm quite happy to just have a go. It's not really, no, I don't do that. You think, well, if it works, it's nice. Again, on holidays, people, I want this and that. I was thinking, you're going to a different country, you can't, it needs to be safe, it needs to be clean. If it's that, just embrace everything that it brings. That's the whole idea, really, going into other people's world and adapting to that. And yeah, some people have, very, very orderly, and that has its benefits, because the very clear policy, the procedure, whatever you work within that, and you can, these days, everything is about data, because it can be shown on data. Whereas I struggle with that, because I feel on piece of paper, all the children in my authority are doing really well, but their real lives, we don't capture really how they're actually feeling, what they have. We helped them get over the trauma they have experienced? Have we helped them to achieve much? Have we helped them to achieve better relationships with their families, with other people, with who they are? And there's no measurement of that. So I have to say, I struggle with it. I found, I do see other people they take a pen and paper and be very much textbook, whereas I'm here, there, and everywhere, and yeah, I'm a little bit of chaos, but then that I just can't put myself in a pigeonhole where I see, yes, there are times when I do need to follow exactly how things needs to be done, but that's not me. I'm adapting myself to meet that task or do that task.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, like the distinction between chaos and order, because I know that for a lot of children who get taken away from their parents, the criticism is that their life is too chaotic, that they're traumatized because there's just too much chaos, and then they get put into families where there's a lot of order. And and I watched a documentary about these children back in the 70s who were sent off to Australia because their lives were too chaotic, and the documentary was about, well, actually it was a film, I think it was about, based on a true story of these children being shipped away to Australia because their lives were too chaotic, and they were sent to this kind of, to live with these monks, these fathers, Christian fathers, in a very kind of orderly environment, which seemed to be quite cruel. So there's a time and place for chaos, and there's a time and place for order. Sometimes we need to be able to be chaotic, like we can't always be orderly. Sometimes my desk is very ordered, and sometimes it's chaotic, depends on what kind of work I'm working on. If it's very creative, then it tends to be everything is all over the place. Whereas if I'm working on something where I need to think in a particular way, then I need to make sure that everything is ordered, my books are ordered, the books that I need, etc. So how do we, we can't say, oh, chaos is bad and order is good, because sometimes chaos is good because we need to disrupt the system, and sometimes order is not always good. Sometimes it's good, but because it makes things efficient and it makes things kind of secure and reliable, but order is not always good, right? So how do we balance, like, when do we know that chaos is fine, and when do we know that order is not fine?
I call it my life as organized chaos. Yeah. Yes, certain things you do need to have that organization in your life, because if I do not have a routine, then I will miss my deadlines, I will not do this, I will not do that. So certain things require me to have that order in my life. And whereas within that, I try and see how much flexibility do I have in that, and I exercise that flexibility. I just really don't feel that I have to do certain things in order to get somewhere. If the house cleaning is not done before my writing report, whatever order I do it in, as long as I get the job done, both the job done, in however I do it. So it's just understanding really where, in some situations, you just have to have the order. I'm chairing a case conference, I need to go through that order. Within that, I will make some changes where they need to be to meet the need of that. And whereas some meetings, I'll say, okay, let's explore, just start let's see what's not, what is in other people's minds, what is important, and just let them share what they have. They will share what's important to them. So
yeah, it's about having a balance, isn't it? Or like even in a meeting, it's a balance of, like, there needs to be order and structure in a meeting, but to allow some sort of chaos, some sort of flexibility within that order. And I think maybe it becomes problematic when people become too chaotic, or when people become too orderly, and so they don't allow for the other way of, so it's contextual, isn't it? If yeah, it depends on the context, how much order and how much chaos is required.
It is. I think you get to get a feel of it as you grow older. You look at really thinking, okay, as you manage and you create life, what works for you. And my daughter, she's very, lists and very organized. Everything has to be, whereas I've got a mental picture, I need to do this and that, and I do it. So I may appear very disorganized, but I say to you, had it been disorganized, would I been able to raise 3 of you? Would I been able to run a household? Would I been able to hold a job? Would I been able to gain education? Not only just gain education, get really good marks as well. So I may appear very disorganized and chaotic, but I do have some order in how I manage that. Without having that organization, I wouldn't have been able to achieve what I do even today, in today's life, whatever you do. So I think it's being able to slip in and out, whichever works best. Where needs to be order, keep the order, and see, it's having that wisdom, knowing the difference in where it's okay, when it's not okay, to let go a little bit.
Yeah, and this reminds me of, like, as you were talking, it reminded me of the fact that my mother had a very, very strong memory, and even though she never made lists because she couldn't, she wasn't able to read and write, so she didn't make shopping lists, for example, but she had a mental memory. She knew exactly what we needed and which shop we needed to go to, etc. And everything, like in the house, she knew what everything was. But there's this kind of, the reason it made me smile as you were talking, because I know one of the other differences between the British approach and our Sikhi approach, in my kind of experience anyway, is that with the British, there's always a place for everything. And so some things go in the bedroom, they don't go in the living room. We had wardrobes and we had suitcases on top of the wardrobes, the suitcases had all the, we didn't,
Okay.
Yeah. Are you still there, Sukhchandan?
Okay, that's my daughter. Just I'll call her back in shortly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so everything has a place, and so there's this kind
what time will we be finishing? Can we just check? Because I probably would need to go by 10 to, if that's okay.
Yeah. We'll just be 2 more minutes now, if that's okay.
No, that's 2, or we got another 7 minutes for me. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. What I was, when you were saying, really, we grew up where bedrooms were not different from the living space. You wake up in the morning, you could, manje khade and all that. That's your living space, and the bedroom wasn't really just a bedroom. And I also really always feel that there's always, in India, you improvise quite a lot. So for me, that gave me the ability to be flexible, to think out of the box. That if something is not made for this particular bit, I'm not stuck. I will find a way to do it.
Yeah.
And the same with, I think it's the same in my profession as well. I just really look at what I need to do. With my daughter gets upset. No, not upset, but like, Mom, you're always doing something. And no, she was the one who was on the phone, and she was saying, why are you working on in the evening, etc. But what I'm saying is there are. I was interviewing somebody many years back with a white colleague, and whenever you're talking, just reminded me, because I was taking the lead and she was taking the notes, and I had no plan, nothing. And she, at the end, she said, Sukhchandan, I didn't see anything written in front of you. How did you do all of that? Because you've got no written plan of what you were going to look at, but all the questioning, and really, they just really came in such an order. I said, I don't have plans. I have areas that I want to discuss about, and then let people and explore within that. So I think that is really one way of seeing how we were working for the same family in the same room about the same issue, yet we were operating so differently.
Great. And well, my final question is this concept of this is the only life we have on earth. So the British way, very often it's about you only live once, and therefore you have to enjoy your life, do everything that you could possibly want to do, because death is the end of everything. Whereas in Sikhi, we are taught about reincarnation. We're taught that this is only one life out of many, and that whatever we do gets carried over with us in terms of our karma, so how do we make sense of both types of education? One, that everything needs to be done in this lifetime, and the other concept where everything we do gets carried over, and it's kind of like a balance of our negative and positive karma.
There's a quite significant event in my life that actually I'll share today. But in terms of the karma that you what you put in, what you sow, you will reap. But in terms of number of lives, what happens after you're dead? I lost a grandson in 2013, and at that point there was question. I was devastated in my own right. I was devastated to see my son and my daughter-in-law literally picking up your grown-up son from the floor, who just collapsed on the floor, to see, really. And it was a very painful time, really painful time. And I was thinking, asking lots of questions, where is he gone? What happened to him? Why he was meant to be just really, he came in alive, we couldn't even hold him. Yet, and I came to conclusion, really, research as much as I could, that no one has come back once they're dead, really come back and say, look, this is what happens. So I believe, really, these are people's creations, thinking, rather than as the fact, because no one has really come back from their life to say, actually, I died and then this is what happened. Mm-hmm. So I kind of struggle with that. There are more than one lives. Mm-hmm. But I do believe in that as nature, we transform into different things. Mitti one, some tomorrow, my ashes, wherever they are, they something, if there's something growing, if they are in water, fish will eat something out of that. So it will transform into something else. Mm-hmm. But I have to say, I don't actually believe in that there is another life, that I will, they say there was a Silak Juna. Yes, people, I don't know. I struggle with that, mm-hmm. that there are different lives. Although I grew up very much thinking, believing all that. Mm-hmm. And I think losing a grandson, and at that point, really trying to find out answers. And I came to the conclusion there was nothing that anybody could tell me, because no one has come back to say, this is what happens.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, well, so it's been wonderful speaking with you, Sukhchandan Kaurji. It's like there's just so much more that we could carry on talking about. I know that you have other plans as well, and so we'll have this conversation again.